Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to firstly thank the CSIR for inviting me to share some information with you. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the CSIR President and you as members of the audience for the time that you've given in coming to listen to this topic at this event. I think before everyone came in and sort of we were chit-chatting, Rudy Handrak from Sasol told me very specifically that I shouldn't contradict him. I'm not going to contradict you, but I'll offer an alternative view to certainly some of the things that he said. So one area where I certainly agree with Rudy and Sasol's sort of conclusions on shale gas is certainly that for the Karoo Basin in particular, that exploration and production in the Karoo is a long-term prospect. And when I mean a long-term prospect, I don't mean 5 to 10 years. I mean really sort of from a couple of years up to decades and even up to 35 to 50 years to see this basin maturing if it does offer success. I suppose the reason I've been invited is twofold. One is because I work at Shell and we're interested in this Karoo opportunity. And secondly, I was invited to participate in the scientific assessment and I contributed to the chapter 1 of the scientific assessment. So we as Shell don't necessarily agree with the scenarios that has been sketched or some of the detailed data in the reports, but that's immaterial. We certainly feel that the scientific assessment is extremely robust and valuable to industry for our planning going forward. So as the session chair said, I started at the CSIR immediately after graduating, and for me the CSIR was is probably the best training ground that I received, and I always look back fondly on the years that I've spent at the CSIR. So I just want to acknowledge one person in the audience. I've brought along a colleague, Dr. Nigel Muruth. He's probably, I think, the only person in this room. So he's a well engineer. He's a graduate from UCT. He's a chemical engineer. But he was trained by Shell, I think in the Permian Basin, if I remember correctly, Neil. Yeah, I'm correct. And so he was relocated about 4 or 5 years ago to Texas to go work on the shale plays in Texas and other basins. So I think more than anyone in this room, he really understands the drilling and the exploration and production of shale gas, and he's our sort of local well engineer. So if there's any technical or engineering questions, I'll certainly be referring it to him. Okay, so back to my talk. What I'm really going to talk about, for about half of my talk, I'm going to talk about why science is important to an organization like Shell. And then I'll focus specifically on the importance of science and technology in exploring the Karoo. And so that's really what I want to demonstrate, this the use and value of science for private industry. And I will draw specifically on my experience as an environmental planner working in a team of explorers. Bob referred to multiple epistemologies. Now, when I use the word science, I'm not necessarily going to use it in the traditional sense of science or the way that CSIR practices science, but certainly the way I'm going to use science is sort of broadly equivalent to knowledge, to refer to both sort of quantitative exact sciences, the qualitative sciences, indigenous knowledge, and the stories and sort of underlying experiences that locals have. And all of this science and all of this knowledge, certainly we use as Shell in our planning and to do what we call to de-risk our projects. And I'll explain what de-risking means. So really what I'm going to talk about are what I personally think are some of the key risks in the Karoo. I'm going to be talking about the risks of the subsurface geology. I'm going to talk about water and skills, people, and also infrastructure, which I'm not going to go to at all. And my talk really focuses on what are we doing to de-risk some of these high-level risks which I've mentioned. So what this diagram basically shows is a number of things. One is at the bottom on the x-axis, that's typically the project cycle that Shell goes through in our exploration and production in our projects. Right at the beginning, we identify an opportunity. Is this a commercial opportunity? The Karoo was identified by Shell in 2010 as potentially an opportunity that we want to explore. So we've been in South Africa since 2010 trying to work this opportunity. And when we started in 2010 to now, we've collected quite a lot of scientific data. We've interacted with academics, CSIR, and others in helping us decrease the uncertainty of our understanding. So when you start out in a project, you have high levels of uncertainty. For the Karoo Basin, we certainly still have high levels of uncertainty. And then as you move through the project cycle, you use science and technology to help you decrease that uncertainty and to de-risk this opportunity and to de-risk this project. So moving away from the Karoo and moving offshore, so I've been involved in deep water exploration in South Africa and Namibia. And just as an example of one of the ways that we've used science to de-risk our projects and to minimize and reduce and avoid risks is we've funded and sponsored primary data gathering by the University of Pretoria. They have a whale research unit which is based in Cape Town. Some of their colleagues are here in Pretoria. And we've contributed to, certainly for whales at least, one of the longest, in terms of decades, the longest ecological monitoring program for whales being run by the University of Pretoria. So we've funded some of this, contributed to funding this research on whale monitoring. So why was this important for us? Certainly, when we perform or undertake activities like seismic activities and drilling activities in deep waters, there are a whole range of things that we need to know. Certainly from my area as an environmental planner, the marine ecology and the marine biota is critically important, certainly from a reputational and environmental risk point of view. And the way that we've used that data, we've basically analyzed that data to see what it means for us in a temporal sort of scale, and what it means for us when we decide on which specific periods in a year and months in the year that we want to go out and do activities in the ocean. So having taking that raw data collected from the University of Pretoria, we were able to then analyze that and come up with a broad indicator, which I then used to communicate to our technical team that if you select certain months of the year to go out and do seismic activities or go out and do exploration drilling, these are the species that you're likely to encounter in the specific blocks in which we have areas of interest. Coming back to the Karoo, an example of how we've applied science to de-risk our projects. So water is a critical risk in the Karoo for us. And over a 4-year period, we worked with a whole range of scientists and academics from Free State University, local sort of academics in the Western Cape and others, a team of about 16 academics and researchers. And they helped us understand the groundwater system in the Karoo. We produced new information, an assessment of new information. We collected some primary data, and we were able to get a spatial picture across the Karoo of groundwater sensitivity. Now, this information is critical for us to understand what the sensitivities are in terms of groundwater and what are the mitigation measures we need to apply when we go into certain areas. The subsurface geology in the Karoo is also an area that's a high risk and critically important for us to understand. This is an area of high uncertainty for which we have very limited data. Dolerites and faults in the Karoo is an area that we need to understand. We need to do initial exploration and apply seismic technologies to be able to better understand and image the dolerites and faults. So we've done internally within Shell some initial work on this to get a very broad understanding of what we are in for if we ever decide to go out and explore in the Karoo. Taking all this data, some of the data which I've showed you here and others, we've sort of crunched it up and done overlay modeling in a GIS system, and we've come up with a map of spatial constraints. So this is a Shell map that we produced a couple of years ago. This is different to the map, a risk map that the CSIR produced as part of I think it's the phase 2 of the scientific assessment. And I think, but broadly speaking, we've come up with more or less, even though we've used different terminologies, we've come up with more or less the same picture. In our analysis, certainly for our area, we've come up with the figure that less than 1% of the area in the blocks that we're interested in, and this is a 90,000 square kilometer exploration area, is at a surface really available to us to explore. And I think that more or less corresponds to the risk map that CSIR has produced. So this is, again, one of the critical ways that we've used science to help us de-risk our projects and help us avoid impacts and minimize our risks. Skilled people is another risk for us in proceeding with exploration. And there's a whole range of activities that we as Shell are doing. Not only have we employed sort of new postgraduates like Dr. Muruth, who's here in the audience, a colleague of mine, we're also funding PhD students and master students, both at UCT and University of the Western Cape, with the view to that if we were to ever proceed with exploration, there's a local body of skills that we can use and sort of not necessarily use expats for most of our skilled pool of people. But one of the things that we've done is when we've undertaken seismic activities, particularly offshore seismic activities, we've donated our raw data to the universities to use that for the training of students and for education purposes. One of the other areas where we've supported research initiatives is an initiative that was housed at the University of Johannesburg and involved a range of universities, WITS, University of Pretoria, Free State, UCT, UWC, and others. I think there's about 12, a consortium of 12 universities, and there was an initiative called the Karoo Research Initiative. They recently published one paper which appeared, I think, last week in the South African Journal of Science on the shale gas potential of the Karoo Basin. But this was an endeavor which we were totally removed from. We provided the funding and they determined their research objectives and what they wanted to do, but they went out and drilled 2 research wells in the Karoo. Again, this information is freely available. It's open source data and open source information, and certainly for us as Shell, this is critically important for us to understand the depositional history of the Karoo and the stratigraphy of the Karoo. Okay, this is one of my last slides. So the ways to, so it's important to understand, certainly from an industry point of view, what we mean by de-risking and opportunity. And some of the information that's in the media fails to understand exactly what industry looks at when we look at an opportunity. So for example, in the media over the last couple of days and last week, there was speculation that the estimates of the gas potential were sort of wildly inaccurate. There were estimates by the Energy Information Administration from the US, which had it at over 300 trillion cubic feet, and local academics have now estimated that at 13 trillion cubic feet. So certainly from our view, no exploration has been done for shale gas. The research wells that were drilled with 2 obviously very important 2 data points to help us understand the geology, the subsurface geology, and the gas in place. So all that data that has been provided hasn't really come up, in my opinion, with what is technically recoverable in the Karoo. That data really sits at what we call an unproven and unrisked shale play, potentially shale play, and all that they've done is analyze what potentially the gas in place figures are. As you move through your exploration stages, you collect more data and you understand what the risks are that you're dealing with in the subsurface. And what we don't know at the moment is gas in the shale formations, is it technically recoverable? There may be gas there, but it may be not possible from a technical point of view to either fracture that rock or let the gas flow. Even if it is technically recoverable, it may not be commercially viable. So there's a whole range of steps that we need to get to be able to understand what the commercial recoverable volumes of gas are. And what the experience in the United States has shown is that the initial estimates that, certainly for some basins in the US, which started out as quite huge sort of volumes, like a couple of 100 trillion cubic feet, they've ended up within orders of magnitude less in terms of estimates of what is commercially or economically viable. And that is a situation, if the Karoo proves a success, that we are likely to face with at the moment. So the more you collect data, the more refined your estimates and understanding of what's available for you to extract commercially, what is possible in the Karoo in terms of a shale play. So in conclusion, industry has contributed to, I mentioned this previously, we've contributed to the scientific assessment, and for us that's been an extremely valuable exercise to work with the CSIR and to work with others, including our opponents in this particular opportunity, to produce what we think is a really robust, useful piece of information, and information that we find extremely valuable in our planning. Thank you.